Looking back, Skyrim has remained at a peak of relevance that no other game can or probably will ever touch, despite still being so broken. Welcome to RetroSpective, the show where I go back to a game with a fresh perspective and really pick it apart for the first time. Again. Today, I'm finally awake and diving back into the province of Skyrim. Like everyone, their mothers and their neighbours' dogs are Reginald Biscuit, I have played an absolute ton of Skyrim since it first graced our unassuming fantasy-craving minds. Oblivion before it was a huge game, and so people had high hopes and expectations, but no one could have been prepared for just what Skyrim was going to be, for fans and for the entire industry, despite its still clunky, somewhat broken nature. With about 143 playthroughs as a stealth archer, and maybe a couple here and there as something that wasn't supposed to be a stealth archer but then ended up being a stealth archer anyway, I realised it had been a good while since I'd actually played the game, and that most of the experience was now a distant blur. Well, that's just not gonna do, so I had to jump back in and make sure that Skyrim is an everlasting part of my very existence and at least 14% of what I dream about at night. With it having been a while, I wanted to make the most of this newfound old-found excitement and really look at the game 12 years later. So, let's do it. The fifth game in the Elder Scrolls series, Skyrim was released in November of 2011, in a time where you could see trailers hyping up fans for this Viking-esque fantasy world and huge billboards with dragons on them. What a good time that was. Released by Bethesda Game Studios, fans knew what to expect with another open-world RPG akin to Oblivion, Morrowind, and even Fallout 3. Still, despite any sort of expectations or ideas of the Foundation, this game would go on to do so much more than any fan, or even Todd Howard himself, would expect. It was released on PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC, then going on to get a re-release. And another re-release. And another re-release. And even a version you can play on your Amazon Echo, if you really want to. Now, with it on PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, and even the Nintendo Switch, the likelihood of you being an innocent non-Skyrim player has dwindled more and more in the last decade. And if you actually haven't played it, well done. But Bethesda will visit your house and release it onto your Roomba to make sure that you do, so don't worry too much. Skyrim is coming for you. Players instantly fell in love with the game and it was a hit, as expected. What wasn't expected, however, was the long-lasting effects and seemingly eternal life this game would have. So, if we're taking a look at the game now in 2023, and what you're actually getting as a new player, how does it hold up? Visually, the game is still excellent and serenely beautiful, but that can be attributed to the countless re-releases and updates in hardware. Of course, you can go back to the old consoles and play the original for a nice, grey, drab experience through a was pretty but now looks more like the UK landscape, but with Skyrim Anniversary Edition being the latest and most accessible version, you can see everything in stunning colour, with shiny god rays, and even put on those 4K big pants and go do some fishing for good measure. Even as a new player today, the story will be as entertaining as ever, and while it doesn't do too much that breaks any narrative boundaries, it still offers up an incredible and in many ways unparalleled experience of feeling like the hero of a larger-than-life fantasy tale. In fact, you can go ahead and be the hero of just about everything. Work your way up the ranks and become the leader of the companions, take to the shadows and become the head of the Dark Brotherhood, pick your side and clash with steel until you are a champion of the Civil War, or just walk into the College of Winterhold and they'll practically hand the keys over to you. The heart of Skyrim's story has always been the side quests and the world, as is the case with just about any of Bethesda Game Studios' games. There is plenty to get absolutely lost in here, and with long-time players still finding new things to discover, a fresh experience is guaranteed to last you for a good while, to say the least. Aside from being a stealth archer simulator, Skyrim's gameplay is actually quite simple, but that's what makes it so eternal. It doesn't rely on convoluted systems, learning curves, or on trends of the time and inventive new ways to play. It just gives you the ability to do what you want, play around with some magic, smack some Draugr with a stick, and just says have fun, and have fun you shall. It is at the heart of all things a sandbox, and there's so much freedom in how you can play that makes it so good, both back in 2011 and still today. Place a bucket on an NPC's head while you steal their wares, continuously escape the wrath of enemies until they forget you ever existed and develop new anxieties about the trickery of the wind.
I guess I was just hearing things.
And drop 24 cheese wheels onto the ground in the town centre for all to see.
What's the matter with you?
It really is a playground of fantasy, even if that fantasy is purely dairy based. Everyone loves a good cheddar build. And then there's the music. Someone starting up Skyrim for the first time is going to have that amazing moment of awe as the chanting of the Nords kicks in, and their unrecognised until now desire to pack up everything material and move their life to the northern reaches of Scandinavia comes to fruition. Actually, wait, no. That experience is not exclusive to new players. That's just what happens whenever anyone starts up the game, even for the 100th time. And then there's that gentle and soothing music that plays as you explore the world. The instruments dancing on the breeze in synchronization, with the aurora borealis decorating the stars, the hopes of adventure, and a world yet undiscovered parting the noises of modern life and making way for a new sense of wonder. And then the drums kick in again as yet another peace-hating mudcrab approaches from the shrubbery, here to defeat the Dragonborn. Ah, they never learn. So, what is Skyrim actually doing well by modern standards? No Nexus mods or unofficial patches, but just the game you can download from the storefront and the experience you can have as a newcomer. Well, if we're counting the Anniversary Edition content, you can do fishing now. That legally makes it a good game. Outside of that, however, Skyrim still manages to grip you and immerse you in its world, but never so much that you take it too seriously. You can get invested in some excellent stories, but the narrative likely won't have you sat on the edge of your seat, eager to see what Alduin's next move is. It uses dialogue and branching paths to a masterful degree, but never reaches beyond offering a relatively light-hearted and downright enjoyable experience. It's not all light-hearted though, just to be clear.
On this day, I go to Sovngarde.
Who's there? Is that you, Father?
Oh Miko, your story is up there with the best of them. Even though I have played this game time and time again, now after an extended period of time away from it, I still find myself naturally exploring off the beaten path, eager to see what that icon on my compass is just over there, what's in that cave atop that mountain, and what that movement is that I can see in the shrubs. Oh, for God's sake, it's another mudcrab. There's a reason, or many reasons in fact, that fans still play this game to this day. Even without the incredibly active modern community, the game continues to push on and be exactly what people still want to sit down and play, regardless of how many new, interesting and incredible titles are released each year. What hasn't aged well? Skyrim is by no means perfect. By no means at all. Bethesda Game Studios has something of a reputation for buggy, glitchy games. I mean, make worlds this colossal and sandbox mechanics to play around with, and it's to be expected. It's almost part of the charm of these games now. Almost. Even 12 years and approximately 547 re-releases later, Skyrim is still a bit of a broken mess in many places. Much of the game has just never worked the way it really should, and it still doesn't. Which is something most people look past at this point, but it can be easily acknowledged. Now, there are definitely things that weren't great in the beginning but have since been addressed, but other things just still don't feel very fun. And if you were to dive into the game for the first time now, they would probably get in the way quite a bit. Literally, in the way. How are these followers still just standing in doorways and staircases, completely stopping you or anyone else from getting past without absolutely barging into them or doing a little bit of magic? There's also the dialogue and the ways the NPCs interact with the world, each other, and with you. Sure, it's a huge game and all of these people go about their daily lives and routines and make it seem like you're amongst them on a perpendicular but often crossing path. but when you keep hearing about how some guy works for Bellathor, how a little girl isn't afraid of you even though you're her elder, how some guy ain't done nothing, and being mocked about never going to the Cloud District every time you've just come from the Cloud District, it gets very old very quickly, and sometimes all you want is to hear a new line of dialogue or hear no dialogue at all. Even in scenes where the story plays out, characters just stand there. No unique animations, no moving performances, just Nords talking over each other while idling in a dimly lit room going on about one thing or another. What's also jarring is the range of performances. Some characters really do sound great, and others sound as dry as an overcooked sweet roll. It can be such a jolt between moments and leave you underwhelmed in many cases. Look, I know the game is old, so I don't expect these things to be perfect or fixed up in the re-releases. Some things would require a much larger overhaul and rework to be able to amend, I get that. These are just some things that have really not aged too well in the years past, and despite the whole experience of Skyrim still being fantastic, these more stale aspects take up a large portion of it. Still, despite all of the remaining issues and shortcomings that can still get in the way of the overall experience, it's clear to see that plenty of Skyrim has evolved over the years, visually, mechanically, and with plenty of additional content. In the early days, Bethesda released DLC packs for the game, in the Dawnguard, Dragonborn, and Hearthfire expansions. Dawnguard offered a notable storyline with opposing factions, the Vampires and the Vampire Hunters. This added an expansive questline wherein you discover a long locked away daughter of the Vampire Lord Harkon. This woman, named Serana, would then travel with you as a companion. Eventually, you would pick a side, join the vampires and receive the powers of a Vampire Lord, or join the Dawnguard and put a stop to Harkon and his followers in their old castle. The Dragonborn expansion was even bigger and was the most significant DLC for the game, offering up a new map, new characters to meet and enemies to fight, and more entanglements with a villain of old and the realm of a Daedric Lord. This was a big story that you could get really invested in, and added a whole lot more to the game that just made it feel super fresh, akin to the Shivering Isles expansion for Oblivion, just with less cheese. Hearthfire gave us perhaps the simplest and most wholesome addition to the game. Buy some land and build yourself a house. Buy a plot of land with 3 to choose from, and gather the materials as you build your dream home, choosing what rooms to put where and decorating it how you want. It was a bit of a change of pace from the other 2 expansions in the game, but likely paved the way for the base building mechanics that Bethesda seems to love now, present in both Fallout 4 and Starfield, and we'll likely see it in full glory with The Elder Scrolls 6 when we're retired and watching our grandchildren play it. Needless to say, if you're hopping into the game fresh nowadays, you'll have plenty to do. All current versions of Skyrim come pre-packaged with all of the DLC, so alongside the extensive game itself, you'll also get access to all these extra adventures and features. Beyond the DLC, Skyrim has had a humorous number of re-releases, turning up on various platforms and utilising the new tech. This has been on PS4 and Xbox One, then PS5 and Xbox Series X and S, and also on Nintendo Switch so you can play Skyrim wherever you are. There was also the joke of releasing it on Amazon Echo. I mean, they did it, so it was kind of a joke.
Alexa, play Skyrim.
You're level 57.
Anyway, each of these jumps has seen a somewhat significant upgrade in the game and how it keeps up with the times, updating the visual fidelity and the overall performance of the game. Again, not fixing too many of the intricate issues and glitches, but it sure got a whole lot prettier. Then there was the Anniversary Edition, which added in a bunch of Creation Club content, verified player-created content that could be bought using a special Bethesda currency of some sort, but it's likely not many people were actually buying it, so it was packaged into this version instead. But hey, it added fishing. The biggest evolution of the game, however, is still continuing to this day: the modding scene. Bethesda has embraced modding for their titles more and more, with the Creation Club content and even pre-prepping Starfield for years of mods before the game has even come out. There are tens of thousands upon thousands of mods for Skyrim out there, and it can be overwhelming, but this means there is something for everyone. Want to add in some custom companions and new quests? There are so many to choose from. Want to make it photorealistic beyond measure? Go for it, though you may need to sacrifice a GPU to do it. Want to turn every dragon into a terrifyingly mutated Thomas the Tank Engine? Why? No, I'm kidding, who doesn't want that? And good news, you can. The modding scene is the biggest out there, almost putting Gmod to shame, and has so much to offer for anyone looking to make Skyrim an everlasting part of their daily routine. So, if Skyrim was to release today as a brand new game, how would it do? Yes, I know it releases all the time, but I mean if it was completely new and fresh and we had never seen it before. Honestly, it probably wouldn't do nearly as well as it did back then, which is to be expected to an extent with a 12-year-old game. It would still be really popular and be a huge experience that RPG and fantasy fans would get completely lost in, but it wouldn't hold the same significance, something that is only developed as a product of the time and the times that followed. I mean, if the game didn't have Bethesda Game Studios' name backing it, it might even be met with extensive criticism as to the shortcomings and the glitches that are present. It's not entirely fair that it's to be expected with games from the studio, and we've definitely seen worse cases with releases such as Cyberpunk, but it's easy to imagine Skyrim being slated if it were to be released by anyone else in current standards. Not to say Bethesda Game Studios is immune to slating, they've seen their fair share, but there's a certain layer of armor there that others don't have. Still, I do believe that Skyrim would remain popular and a fan favourite even today, perhaps not as big or as impressive as there have been so many games that have surpassed it in many aspects, and it is over a decade outdated, but even so, it still does a lot that no other game has done yet, and offers an experience so simply enjoyable where others may reach too far or confine themselves to something more compact. So, given the number of shortcomings and bugs, not to mention the extensive issues with save files and game slowdowns on the PS3 version of the game in its early days, just why did Skyrim do so well? Skyrim went on to become one of the indefinite games that set a standard for the industry, in the same way titles like Minecraft and Dark Souls did. Only Minecraft was a sandbox and is designed to be played with and expanded upon, and Dark Souls was somewhat niche, following Demon Souls, and led to a new genre and imitation more so than living a long life. Skyrim was another Bethesda RPG, of which we've seen plenty of and will see plenty more. In many ways, it was missing a lot of what Oblivion and the games before it did, and in other ways, Fallout 4 expanded upon the structure and features following it, further improving the design of these games. So why Skyrim? The truth is, I don't really know. There are a number of things that I could praise when it comes to Skyrim, things that it does that make it such an engaging and enjoyable experience. But these are also things that Oblivion did, that Morrowind and Fallout did, and that so many other games prior and since have also done. Skyrim created a true sandbox without aiming to, and Bethesda offered the tools needed for people to tweak that and add to it as much as they wanted to, in the same way as the source engine surrounding Half-Life, Portal and Team Fortress. Only Skyrim was a much bigger and more accessible name, and had much more freedom behind it. A world packed full of inspiring content and impressive immersion, leading people to create even more that they could dream up, adding it to the game and offering those realizations up to the rest of the community. But even on the console side of things, way before mods were made available on these platforms, the game pushed boundaries and expectations, and it became something so much more significant than it ever really was. It was the staple game of the times, and was hitting a benchmark that no other games were really striving for, or at least hitting. Not to say it was the most perfect game of the generation and everything else should be discarded. We know that Skyrim had issues and problems, and wasn't doing too much beyond what we were expecting. But somehow what it became was actually way more than those expectations. Way more than what the final product actually was. The final product, as it happens, was not the final product. But what could Skyrim have actually done better? What could have been different, beyond just fewer bugs and better graphics? There's a lot that you could argue that the game could have done, but there are likely equal arguments as to why they haven't been done. Well, maybe even just one argument. Did it need to? The game succeeded and did so exceptionally. To say that it should include refined cinematics, improved variations in animations, and even an expanded pool of characters and voice lines to make everything feel so much more sparse and alive, well, it clearly didn't need all of that, and it's hard to say if those things would have been a detriment to the game if included. Would a larger and less iconic community within a city cause less familiarity and increase separation for players? Would expanded animations feel too much and perhaps take away from the simplicity of the game? To be honest, even when I see mods that tweak the framework of the game and add in all new animations, it almost feels off. Maybe this is because it's third party, or maybe it's just because it doesn't naturally fit with the game. It's hard to say what could have been improved with Skyrim, and everyone will always have their own personal wish lists when it comes to what they want. And in a way, that's what the game allowed, and that's what the mods actually do. They take this base game that has everything you could want from it in a normal and enjoyable experience, and then allows you to pick and choose from what you want to add to it. If you want a certain activity, a certain outfit, or a feature that was never included, chances are someone has made that for you to add in and personalize by complete choice. It's a game that is what you want it to be, and whether or not that was the overall intention of Bethesda Game Studios, it is what it became. Skyrim is a beautiful and broken game, and it has remained both. It's a game that was never perfect, but it became a benchmark for the industry and grew from both community support and as a sign of the times. It never reached for great heights, only seeking to expand the experience that the previous games in the series offered. This has always been the way with the Elder Scrolls, ever since Arena, but Skyrim just hit that sweet spot, completely unintentionally. Of course, a studio will always aim for success when it comes to a video game, but this level of success is something that you can't predict, and in most cases, you can't aim for. You can only really wish for it. It's just not realistic to try and be the biggest game to last for over a decade, and Skyrim was never meant to be. But regardless, it remained.